Hey guys, welcome back to the Ultimate Goosebumps Man channel, and today I am joined by Goosebumps Completionist once again for another collab video. And today we're doing something a little more interesting, not Goosebumps related, but this is talking about another one of my really big passions and loves, and it's a movie that, Completionist and I both talked about, we both really enjoyed it, and that is Haunted Mansion from 2023, the Disney movie. Yeah, I just absolutely love this movie. I think it's just a really phenomenal watch overall. And we'll obviously get more into our thoughts on it. But first, how are you doing today, Completionist?
I'm doing great. I've been watching more movies on my other channel recently, but I'm also like trying to find that balance of having like two channels. I have Goosebumps Completionist, and then I have Horror FFA. So having a lot more fun, balancing both channels out recently. And I'm glad that you invited me on to do this movie because I think that it was probably the most slept on Disney film last year, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, that's for sure. This is like, in my opinion, this is the most overhated movie of 2023. Like the amount of crap I've seen people give this movie just blows my mind because I don't understand what people have wrong with it other than the fact that Disney's associated with it and that automatically just makes people want to crap on it.
Yeah, and like I mentioned to you, I was looking at Wikipedia today about it just to kind of like see if the film made money and get some more backstory about the people who made it. And they had like $150 million budget, and they only scraped like 115, so they lost some money on this. And I think that's a travesty. And I can kind of understand to a degree people being upset with Disney's quality of films recently, but this film is one of the few exceptions where I think they actually cared. It's like one of those Spider-Man 3s that they put out recently in the MCU where the quality is here, but the audience just didn't pay to go see it, and that's sad to me. Um, I think a lot of the criticisms I've seen of this is kind of overinflated, and a lot of it I think you're on the money with. Is because Disney's associated with it, and Disney has this stigma because of their reputation and how bad it's gotten over the years. It just having Disney attached to it, I think, did a disservice to it because it was an exceptional movie for
hmm
sure.
So yeah, I guess we can just kind of go into probably start with the basic plot synopsis of the movie for people who have not seen it. So, for any of you who aren't aware of Disney, this movie is based on the Disney Parks attraction called the Haunted Mansion, and that's a classic Disney ride. It's my all-time favorite. It's been around since the late 1960s in Disneyland, and it's been in Walt Disney World. It's been adapted in a unique way in Disneyland Paris with the version called Phantom Manor. It has countless merchandising and a lot of really great media around it. Not so much with the original attempt at a film adaptation in 2003 starring Eddie Murphy. That movie was kind of a mess and very. Oh, they tried to play up the comedy a little too much, and they didn't really focus on what made the ride special. And they just used the ride as a very bland base launching point to make the movie off of, with very few nods to it or anything like that. And it was a very disappointing movie overall. I have nostalgia for it because that's the movie that got me interested in the ride. So I wouldn't be the fan I am without it. But looking back on it, it's not a great adaptation of the ride, which I understand because the ride doesn't really have a definitive story, so they kind of had to loosely adapt it. But yeah, this movie does it so much better. And basically, plot of this movie is surrounded this guy named Ben, played by Lakeith Stanfield, and he is recently going through some kind of scenario. We don't really know what it is fully at the beginning of the movie, but we do see in the opening scene we see him at this party in New Orleans where he meets a woman named Alyssa, and they both kind of get along. Ben is an astrophysicist. Alyssa is a ghost tour guide, and it kind of then cuts to 5 years later. I can't remember the exact time skip, but and you see Ben is in a bad headspace, and it's kind of implied that something happened between him and Alyssa, but we don't really know what yet. But we know now he is leading her ghost tours, and he's very pessimistic about it. He doesn't believe in ghosts. He's very mean to the customers he's giving the tours to, and basically he ends up getting called by this woman named Gabby and her son Travis, who moved into a new mansion that they bought, which Gabby plans to turn into a bed and breakfast. And it turns out that this mansion is haunted. And basically, it's revealed that once you enter the mansion, you cannot leave, because if you do, a ghost will follow you home, much like how the end of the ride says, and they force you back into the mansion. And so they start recruiting all of these other people, like a psychic, a priest, and this is a professor, to come into the mansion and solve this mystery and try and basically figure out how they can get free.
Yeah, and I think the plot of this one compared to the 2003 movie where Eddie Murphy has a home that he's trying to sell and brings his family to it, and they get roped up in the house and the whole evil inside of it. I think this setup is a more fun take on like a hostage movie. It kind of has that in its veins. And for like a family friendly hostage supernatural ghost movie, that feels immersive like that ride from Disney World, I think is a way better product overall. And I have to commend the actors here. Lakeith Stanfield, who plays the main character, he did a fantastic job. And I think every character in this movie, all these characters that get introduced into the story as well, the recruits, I should say, they all have some jaded personalities. They're not the typical Disney characters that are perfect. They all have something wrong with them. And the movie comes to explore those weaknesses within them, and they have to overcome said weaknesses to win in the end and, work themselves out of the situation. And I think it's an inspiring film altogether. I think the effects were great, especially on the ghosts. I think the set pieces look phenomenal. I don't know if they filmed this in Walt Disney Studios itself, or maybe they went on set or on location for some of this stuff and built onto it. But it looks spectacular. It almost looks spot for spot like the rides that you expect in Disneyland or in Disney World. It feels very similar, if not the same. Or they took the blueprints and they made it for this movie. It's truly an escapist film, I would say, and I really dig the character growth of Lakeith Stanfield's character and how that plays into the climax and the Hatbox Ghost and how he kind of releases all that pent up anger he's had for 5 years or how many years he's been going through this pain and trauma. And you can get a sense of what he's been through and how that all releases. And there's sequel bait there. I mean, if they wanted to build a sequel too, which is I think pretty cool, and I would love to see these characters come back.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of going what you said about the set design and stuff, and just how much attention to detail they put into recreating scenes from the ride. Because Justin Simien, the director of this movie, is a fan of the ride. He worked on it for a long time, and he went behind the scenes when making this movie to make sure everything was as accurate to the ride as possible. And you get fantastic recreations of things like the stretching room, which they use very cleverly. And I think there's a really cool sequence with that, which takes the concepts of the ride version, but then adds stakes to them, which I really like that sequence. They have the ballroom, which again looks identical to the ride, and there's even a nice little homage near the end of the movie where you see from the balcony all the ghosts dancing and you hear the music and stuff, which is just shot straight out of the ride. And there's just so much other love that me as a diehard fan for years have like picked up on, just like little things like the details on the doors are identical to the doors in the corridor doors that you see in the ride. Or there's even like a chair in the seance room that's identical to an iconic chair from the ride. And there's just so many little details here and there that you can just tell were lovingly put into this movie to make it something that the fans would love. And they also include a lot more of the ghosts from the ride, because the Eddie Murphy movie has them in that graveyard scene. It's pretty much the only scene you get anything from the ride in terms of ghosts. But this movie incorporates them as central villains. The Hatchet Man that you see in the corridor doors with the ghost with the hatchet and the bulging eye. Constance Hatchaway, the bride from the attic. You see her in a few scenes, and she has one of the best sequences in the movie, in my opinion, where Ben encounters her in the attic. The Hatbox Ghost being the main villain is just a great thing to do because he's like the fan favorite ghost from the ride. And I will admit I have a little bit of complaints because there are some ghosts they could have utilized more. Like I wish that you saw more of the hitchhiking ghosts because you only see them briefly in one scene, which is kind of a shame. And there's some other things like I kind of miss the singing bus. I kind of wish they incorporated those in the movie somehow, but very minor nitpicks in terms of that stuff. I think the fan service was phenomenal.
Yeah, and I will say this: Madame Leota, played by Jamie Lee Curtis in this. Forgive me, I forget who originally voiced Madame Leota on the ride. I know she was a very important woman, and they've been trying to. Do you know her name?
Yeah, her name is Eleanor Audley.
Eleanor Audley. Yeah.
She voiced Maleficent, Lady Tremaine. You know, she voiced a bunch of classic Disney villains. So,
And I think they used her like actual like face for Leota too,
um,
right?
no, the face was actually by an Imagineer named Leota Toombs.
Leota Toombs. Okay.
Actor.
Okay, so now I remember the story. Okay, so I remember I saw something a few years back on the ride. I think it was on Disney Plus, and yeah, now I remember. You know, I don't keep up with this stuff as much as I do with other rides like Tower of Terror, but for this movie having Jamie Lee Curtis playing Madame Leota, I think she's a very good stand-in for this character. And if they ever want to reimagine the ride and do another Leota, Jamie Lee Curtis, they can use her. I mean, she did a great job, and I like that she has so much range. She can be the mom in Freaky Friday. She could be Laurie Strode in Halloween. She could be Madame Leota. I mean, she's a scream queen for sure. Seeing her back here after she won an Academy Award and Everything Everywhere All at Once is incredible, and I think her performance was very good, and I like to see that her career is still going. Um, and one thing I want to add is that like Disney for I guess the past 25 years has been doing like ride adaptation movies. The first one I think was Tower of Terror, which was like an ABC Wonderful World of Disney movie.
Yep.
And I've always had a lot of passion for that because they actually shot that film at the Tower of Terror in Orlando. They actually
Wow.
they had it closed off and they filmed it in there. Um, and that's why I love going back to that movie because you can see parts of the ride in it. So maybe some older ones I don't know if they still have in there, but you could see that stuff and be like, I've seen that many times. Every time I go to the ride, I see that. This movie has kind of the same effect, right? It just like you see this like, oh, like especially the shot you talked about where you get the aerial down view of the ballroom dancing scene. That's straight out of the ride, and I'm just like, man, that's awesome. I'm glad they're able to capture this stuff. And in terms of quality, in terms of overall quality of kids horror movies, like I made a rant recently on my channel over the past 10 years of kids horror. This one isn't necessarily the type of movie I'm after, but for a ride adaptation movie based around in the horror element for family, this was great. Honestly, like given everything else, it's not like my favorite movie ever, but I came out really loving this, like genuinely. Um, and I know we both have negatives. I guess you should start with yours first.
So as I kind of mentioned before with the ghost thing, like, this is more of a, again, as I said, more of a nitpick than a negative, that they could have utilized some of the ghosts a bit more than they did, like the hitchhiking ghosts, the singing bus, I kind of wish were in it. Things like the Hatchet Man ghost, I feel like would have been cool to see, like that scene during the reverse seance when Ben is going around the mansion when he first encounters the Hatbox ghost, and you see the Hatchet Man possess Ben's body. You get that for like 3 seconds, then he's immediately pulled back out again. And I feel like that could have been a really interesting kind of idea to build off of and have him like be possessed for a decent amount of the movie and have the real Ben be stuck in the spirit realm. I thought that would have been really cool. And also there's a lot of things like a lot of people pointed out. There's a lot of product placement in this movie.
Yeah.
Like it's very blatant product placement. It's not like sneaky. It's just in your face. And I think that was definitely a bit of a unnecessary thing. And then I think you touched about this before we started recording, but the pacing as well. It's a 2-hour long movie, and there's a lot of filler I feel like they could have cut or done something different with. That's really it, my negatives.
Yeah, you're getting into my main one here. For a 2-hour long movie, it does feel bloated. And, I didn't notice this on my theatrical viewing of this movie because I saw it in theaters. I went out and paid my money. Well, actually, I work at a theater, so I didn't have to pay money. I get free tickets. But I did pay money on concessions to go see this movie. And I had a ball with it. But seeing it for a second time at home, when you're in that home setting, it's a completely different vibe because you start to be like, okay, maybe they can get on with this. Maybe they're doing too much of this recruiting stuff here. They're doing too much antics here. They're not using the ghost properly or evenly in these sections of the movie. And it does start to kind of affect the enjoyment of it. It does get in the way. They could have maybe cut off 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It made an hour and 45 clean. Um, but, I don't know if the director, I can't remember his name either. I don't know if this was his first major picture that he's ever done. And if it is, he did an impressive job. I think he did it if it is his first major one. But I feel like, you know, if I was maybe, to give some advice to this man, if he's going to make more movies, is to cut out the bloat.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of first time filmmakers kind of try to pack so much in there sometimes because they think they don't want to miss out on every little detail or miss out on any potential joke that can be funny or something. But I can understand that if it is his first time, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend that padding didn't bother me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the main one there. And like you said, I think not using every ghost that they're going to possibly pack in here because this ride has been around forever. And we've always wanted all these ghosts in these movies, and not to get every single one is kind of disheartening. But then again, there is room for a sequel, and I think that was their intention. Like if it made money, they were going to make another one. Maybe they'll make a second one just straight to Disney Plus. Might be lower budget, but maybe we can get more ghosts that way. I don't know. Um, but I wish there was more of the ghosts in here working with the story. I do like the fact that the Hatbox Ghost was the main villain, though. I
Mm-hmm.
have to be honest. The Hatbox Ghost is just too iconic.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's weird because when you realize Jared Leto voices him of all people,
I know,
like,
and that's probably one of my favorite performances of him that he's done recently. I mean, he did Morbius and he played the Joker. No offense to those roles, but not a big fan. But Hatbox Ghost, great stuff. Great stuff, Jared Leto.
I don't know if it's just because he was just doing voice acting for it, he wasn't actually having to physically be there, but because the Hatbox Ghost is fully CGI. But
I mean, this for CGI ghosts, they looked incredible, and I don't think we've touched on this. If you are like a total practical effect, you know, that or die with a film. Give this movie a shot if you don't like CGI because the CGI looks spot on. I mean, spot on to the illustrations and the designs in that Disney ride. I mean, almost perfectly. You got to see it to believe it. Honestly, like if they wanted to update the ride with some CGI and kind of enhance it a little bit, they can easily use the overlays from this movie because they look that incredible.
yeah, and the cool thing is, like, a lot of the ghosts were practical makeup effects and stuff that were just CGI to look like ghosts. Like, there's a ton of behind the scenes photos on Instagram and stuff that I follow the guy who did a lot of the behind the scenes makeup. And yeah, pretty much all the ghosts, like the hitchhiking ghosts, the mummy, Constance Hatchaway, the Hatchet Man, all these ghosts are practical CG or practical makeup. So, and I think that's just really commendable as well that they actually took that extra step and made a lot of the ghosts as practical as they could, and then just enhanced them with CGI because it just really it shows that they had a lot of passion put into this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I have to give my roses to the person who did the effects. I don't have a physical copy on me, so I can't see who did them. But they did a fantastic job. The practical effects, they were enhanced by CGI to make them look like ghosts, like I said. But I just don't see how that stuff can be overlooked by the people who watch this movie because that probably took hours and hours and hours to get perfected each and every time they went to shoot a scene. And I have to tip my hat to them. I mean, phenomenal, phenomenal work. I think they should be in more movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, they remind me of like Greg Nicotero in his prime. Like if they can make stuff look this accurate, put them in more like adult horror movies or give them some more kids horror work because they did a great job.
Yeah, and I also just love how they even include some nods to the Walt Disney World Haunted Mansion with the mansion that Alistair Crump or the Hatbox Ghost lived in looks like the mansion from Walt Disney World, and like from the exterior wise. And there's even like a little nod in the main mansion where Ben is like exploring the mansion near the finale, trying to get to Travis once they realize the Hatbox Ghost has set his sights on him. And he opens the door, and there's like that endless staircase room that's directly ripped from the Walt Disney World mansion. And there's just, I like that they don't just take the Disneyland mansion. They take elements from all the different mansions and fuse them into this movie, which you can just, again, it just shows how much love and fan service this, or, you know, how much of a fan Justin Simien and the people were making this movie to make it. I don't know. I've already said this a lot, but, you know, make it like the ride and make fans of the ride happy. And even things like another small detail is in Alistair Crump's manor, when they're going to the fireplace to find his hat, there's those like guards around the fireplace, and those are the same exact, I think they're actually taken right from the ride, but they're the like those bat dividers that are in the loading area of the ride.
Oh yeah, they are there.
Yeah.
You just pointed that out, and I'm like, dude, that's what they are. Because I was like, dude, that's like a really cool thing, and I couldn't remember because I haven't ridden the ride since before COVID.
Mm.
So I haven't been there in a few years. I've only ever ridden the ride in my lifetime, maybe 3 or 4 times. But I'm glad that you pointed out because now that I think about it, I do remember that.
Yeah, I just rode the ride in 2022 because I went to Disney with like my high school band and choir, and I rode that ride 3 times in the day we went to Magic Kingdom. So
Oh yeah, Magic Kingdom is lit. Um, so I kind of want to bring up like the unfair criticisms part that I've been seeing, because I see a lot of people kind of typecasting this as a gimmick movie, which to be fair, it is because it is playing on that old Disney making brides into movies. But it's not like a Pirates of the Caribbean where you can make a film franchise and they made a story out of nothing out of that ride. And they turned it into a franchise. And good for Jerry Bruckheimer and all the producers there. I think they're trying to reboot it. And I also think they're trying to like also soft remake Tower of Terror. I think I've heard that out there
I
somewhere.
think so,
Um,
yeah.
and this is going back to that ride love service type of movie. But people are like, oh, this is a franchisable thing. This is just a fan service ride gimmick movie. I think that's kind of unfair because I think there's room for that in Disney's repertoire because they have all this untapped resources. They can make rides, ride themed movies. Like they can make a Space Mountain movie. You know how hyped that would be? I guarantee you everybody would be lined up there. I mean, they did what, Tomorrowland
Jungle
a few years
Cruise.
ago.
They did a Jungle Cruise with Dwayne
Jungle
Johnson.
Cruise. Jungle Cruise is another one that they made from scratch, and that wasn't too bad. But everybody's like typecasting this as like, oh, we're getting back into ride gimmick movies, Jungle Cruise, Tomorrowland, blah blah blah. I can understand the frustration, but look, there's still so much more out there, and I think if they make it with this kind of quality in mind, I'm not gonna mind them. You know, I wasn't the biggest fan of Tomorrowland because it just didn't capture for me what Tomorrowland brought out of me when I visited there. But I still like the movie. You know what I mean? It's none of these movies are actually bad. The only one that I think I'm not that big of a fan of is actually the 2003 Haunted Mansion one.
Yeah.
And that's saying a lot. That's saying a lot. Like I guess I'm easy to please, and I wonder if you feel the same way. Do you think that these are like gimmick movies?
I don't think so. I just have fun with them because as a big Disney Parks fan myself, you can see I have a Pirates of the Caribbean poster in my background here.
Yeah, exactly.
But I love the fact that these movies try to do their own story, but they do pay respect to the ride because these are geared towards the fans of the ride. So I love that they include like these little fan servicey moments that reflect the ride because that's gonna make a lot of the ride fans happy. Like I was happier than I've ever been watching this Haunted Mansion movie because of all of the Easter eggs and stuff that I picked up on as a diehard fan of the ride since I was like a kid. And fun fact, I actually saw this movie 3 times in the theater. So that just goes to show how much I loved it. And then I literally watched it the day it came out on Disney Plus.
That's some hardcore fandom. And look, I hope the movie finds an audience outside of the theater. I hope it gains a more cult following than it probably already has. Um, but like to the unfair criticisms, I've seen a lot of people say, "What next? Are they going to make People Mover the movie? Or they're going to make Test Track the movie?" Hey, actually, I wouldn't mind a test track movie.
Yeah, that'd be
Okay,
interesting.
that would be interesting. You know, I want to know what they would go with that, but I think it would be cool. I've already thrown out Space Mountain. Disney paid me a
I've
royalty
heard,
check. I'm happy with that.
I know I've heard rumors that they're in the works of making a Big Thunder Mountain movie.
Yeah, Big Thunder Mountain is in the works. I heard somewhere out there they're talking about doing another Tower of Terror reimagining, and that one could be really scary. They can, like, if they want to play up the Twilight Zone part, I don't know if the rights would be an issue there, but I would love it if they did.
Yeah, that'd
I,
be really cool.
and they can just use the same story that's built into the rides. And I think people are kind of missing the point with these type of movies where ride first, movie second. You know, a lot of the times in Disney parks, it's the movie first, then the ride second.
Hmm.
But going from the ride first, you get to have the whole. I mean, you do have something already set in stone, but you have a whole open canvas to work with, and still kind of incorporate the things that people love in it to make something new out of. It's not something like if you're making a ride adaptation from a movie, you're trying to make it as close to that as possible. You don't have the more creative leeway as you would going
Hmm.
the other route. And I like I said, I'm all ears for all these, like, maybe not the adaptation ones, but you know, the homebred rides that are put into the parks. They can take these and make into films, because I think it's a good idea. I really do.
It'd be really cool. Another one that'd be really cool is Expedition Everest from
Oh
Animal
yeah,
Kingdom. That'd be
oh
really
yeah, an Expedition Everest movie where, you know, a family goes out and finds the Yeti, like a killer Yeti or something. That could be really cool in like a PG way. I don't know if they're gonna do like gore and violence.
well,
That'll be
no, it'd
interesting.
be, and even include like some things like have them go on like a train into the mountain and then like that turns into a roller coaster thing. Just to have that little like nod to the ride would be
I
really fun.
know, like they could go on like a mine cart, or they're on something and it just derails and they go backwards. You know, it's little
Yeah,
nods like that. That'll be fun.
or even
There's
like
so
in this
much.
movie is in the Haunted Mansion movie as well. There's a really fun nod to the Doom Buggy ride vehicles in the chair that Tiffany Haddish's character is sitting in the seance room. After they're like calling on Madame Leo, that the Hatbox Ghost like possesses the chair and has it like move her through the house and out into the street. And just looking at the chair, it's obvious that it's a reference to the ride vehicles because it has that like clamshell kind of shape and it's black and stuff. And
Yeah, and
like,
you fit multiple. Yeah, I mean, I just don't think that's really fair to pigeonhole the movie to.
mhm.
Another thing is the fact that Disney's name is attached to it. You know, the Disney stigma. I guess we should address it. The Disney stigma. You know, I kind of get it if you're burned out on the MCU or some of the Disney Plus shows, like the Mighty Ducks TV show, y'all. I'm a lifelong Mighty Ducks fan, but that Mighty Ducks TV show ain't it. It ain't it, and it got canceled for a good reason. I can understand frustrations with the Disney brand and their live actions, like the live action Lion King and all that, kind of making people upset. But this was a much needed facelift. A much needed facelift. I saw people defending the 2003 movie over this, and I'm like, are you defending it because it's an older film, an older Disney movie, and you're hating on new Disney, or are you just refusing to watch it because you're stuck in nostalgia and you're not even like giving it a fair chance? Um, and I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on that perspective, because I think it's more so the second thing where people are just refusing to watch it and just saying bad things about it. Because I don't think people would really hate it if they went and saw it. It's not that bad.
Yeah, well, another thing I've seen is people are calling this movie a pointless remake of the 2003 movie, even
It's
though
not
they're
even a remake.
no, they're literally nothing alike. They just see that's the same name, and they're like, okay, this is a remake because that's what Disney does nowadays, and so everyone just like wrote it off because they think it's gonna be bad because it is remaking the 2003 one, and it's like it's literally a remake in name only. Like it's a completely different movie in every single conceivable way, and I think a lot of it has to do with like again, there's a lot of people I know who are just nostalgic for the 2003 movie, and so they don't want to give this a chance because they think it's going to ruin the 2003 Eddie Murphy movie and their nostalgia for that movie. Which is like I have nostalgia for the movie. Again, it's the movie that made me interested in the ride. But, I can still admit it's not a great movie by any means, and it's not a great adaptation of the ride. Oh, and also another thing I want to mention about the new movie that's awesome. The score. The
Oh
score
yeah.
of this movie is the Grim Grinning Ghosts, the song from the ride, just reimagined in different ways, which was really cool and really nice to see how they incorporated that one song into this movie. Because in the it's the same way with the ride. Like every single piece of music in the ride, aside from the bridal wedding march in the attic, is just a variant of Grim Grinning Ghosts in some way, shape, or form. And so I love that this movie actually takes that same concept into the score. And that's just, again, it's just a really fun little nod that the 2003 movie didn't have. You have like 3 notes of Grim Grinning Ghosts in the very beginning opening credits of the movie. And then you hear the singing busts do it briefly. And that's it. The rest, I will say the score for the 2003 movie is really good. I do really like the score for that movie. But it just doesn't fit Haunted Mansion.
Yeah, I have to say the remake argument is just bogus. You know what? A shot for shot remake Disney's done recently that is more, in my opinion, the worst case scenario is the Under Wraps remake they did on Disney Channel. That is pretty much shot for shot that original movie. Just give or take some mild plot differences and some tweaks in the characters. They're pretty much the same film, and I'm not kidding. And I guess they made it for like rights holding issues because that original movie was owned by them and Hallmark, but this one is just owned by them now. So I guess they did that kind of remake to acquire rights and have, I guess, more likeness to that original movie. But this, calling this a remake of the 2003 movie is absolutely egregious in almost every planet possible because it has nothing to do with each other. The characters aren't the same. The plot is totally different. The setup is totally different. And you can clearly tell that if you actually sat down and watched the movie. If you want to say the movie's boring, that's fine. I mean, it does have its slow parts. It's not the most hit the ground running movie ever. It does take its time to build. It does have some revelations that you have to be patient with in the film. But if you stick with it, I think you'll find yourself like the ride, having a fun time. And honestly, I'd probably give this for kids horror standards these days. I'd probably give this like a B plus. You know, it's a pretty exceptional movie. Like it's a very good above average film. I'd actually go out of my way to own it in my collection, and I'm actually looking to get one soon. I'm just being patient with it because money's kind of frugal these days.
Yeah. And another argument I see that's like the most BS argument for this movie is that it's woke because the main cast is African American. And it's like,
Yeah.
that doesn't make it woke. And like the way they have a more diverse cast, it's like this movie's set in New Orleans, and New Orleans has a very diverse community. That's just naturally how New Orleans is. So I like that they lean into that. And the thing that bothers me is things like The Princess and the Frog from Disney, or even the 2003 Haunted Mansion, which also has a fully African American main cast. Those get a free pass for some reason, but because this was made in the recent times, it's considered woke.
Yeah, there's nothing in the movie, in my opinion, that ties to that terminology. At least in the common vernacular people use that in. There's really no like politics in it at all. It's free of that stuff. And if you have a problem with a diverse cast, I think you should maybe think inward and maybe do some self-reflecting because that's not an issue. If you had an issue with this movie, you probably should have had an issue with 2003's movie because that entire family and almost the entire cast was African American. So like that's just bogus to me. But I have seen it out there, and I don't try to give people the time of day if they say it like that because it kind of shows me that they actually didn't watch the movie and they're just putting a label on it because they associate the term with Disney, and you can clearly tell that they're not actually watching. They're just like hate spewing stuff out there to get people to not watch it.
Yeah, and that's the thing that drives me crazy about movie going audiences nowadays is like half the people who talk trash about these movies haven't even watched them. They just base their opinions on the general internet mindset and just go along with it without, like, I like to use the phrase the internet hive mind because that's basically what it is. Because nobody can form their own opinions on anything anymore, it feels like.
Yeah, and I think that definitely attributed to the reason why this film didn't make money. Honestly, I think you had the Disney stigma on top of the word of mouth. People were saying saying all these negative things about it. Most of them probably never even saw the movie. They just saw reviews or saw a bandwagon form on social media and said, "Hey, I'm just going to hop on this." And these are the same type of people that if a movie's said to be good, then they'll go out of their way to watch it. But if it's bad, they don't actually watch it and just say it's bad and act like they watched it. Um, I definitely think that hurt this movie. Also, at the time of year this released last year, I know that it was up against some other movies that were kind of really still popular,
Hmm.
and there were some more adult horror films kind of coinciding with it, competing with it. Um, so that kind of hurt it. But I think this movie, I hope Disney doesn't get discouraged with this movie not making money, to not move forward with other projects of adapting these rides into films because I want to see more of it. Call it a gimmick if you want. I don't care. I'm into this stuff.
Hmm.
I want to see more of it.
Yeah, and like the other thing about like people criticizing the movie for being boring that drives me crazy is like they call this boring, and yet they praise Oppenheimer, which is the most boring movie in existence in my opinion. Like I left the theater halfway through. Like I could not sit through that movie. Like I was falling asleep.
Yeah, when I saw it in theaters, I had to take breaks. I took like 3 breaks. I gave myself mental breaks, like 5 minutes at a time. I'll get to a point in the movie. I'm like, I know nothing's gonna happen for like 10 minutes. I'm just gonna step out real quick.
Like the only reason I feel like people praise that movie is because Christopher Nolan is behind it.
Yeah, I mean, it's another one of those phenomenons I just don't get.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a travesty, honestly, because I think if people gave this movie a fair shot, like if you're out there watching and you've been on the fence whether you wanted to try this movie, listen to us and just give it a fair shot. I will commend you if you actually go into it with an open mind than just saying, oh, this seems like a pointless remake or this is woke Disney, yada yada yada, whatever you've heard on the internet that's making you dissuade to watch it. Just give it a try, and if you don't like it, that's fine. But at least give it a shot because I think you'll probably like a lot of elements, especially if you're a fan of the ride, like myself. Look, I have this painting or this limited edition art print of the Hatbox Ghost, and I have to hang it up somewhere on my wall. But I love the Haunted Mansion, and I'll be the first to admit this is probably the best Haunted Mansion anything we've gotten in the past, I don't know, 25 years. Aside from the not IDW, but SLG comics they made, it was a very limited run years ago. I really love that stuff. That gets more into the backstory of the ghost in the mansion. I love that stuff.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, I actually saw an idea that I thought would be really cool if they wanted to do more like media stuff with Haunted Mansion. Make an anthology TV show telling the backstories of the different ghosts and how they died and how they ended up in the mansion. Like that'd be a really cool idea.
oh, that'll be so dope. It would be kind of like Tales from the Walking Dead, but you focus in on the Haunted Mansion, and you can go into all the various characters in the lore and build up that way. That's such a good idea. I
I
don't know
mean,
why nobody's ever thought of that.
yeah, I don't know, because I think it'd be difficult to pull off because some of the characters, like Constance Hatchaway, for example, where her whole backstory is she murdered her husbands to gain more wealth. And I feel like I don't know how they'd be able to pull that off well in a Disney show.
I mean, they
But
could
like,
maybe do a TV 14.
yeah, they could like though because they did with the Goosebumps, even though it's terrible, they did with the Goosebumps reboot where they made it more mature.
They make it more mature, and they can put more adult things in it. I mean, the Goosebumps show had adultery, it had murder in the
That's
plot,
true.
it had that foul language. I mean, if they can do that, they could probably do a little bit, I guess, race, racier
Yeah.
haunted mansion. If you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think the problem is nowadays they probably wouldn't do that just because anthology TV shows just don't do well nowadays. I feel like in terms of like general audience, like, obviously there's people like us who love anthology stuff, but a lot of the general audience nowadays just like serialized shows and that's all they want to watch.
Yeah, serialized shows they do. That seems to be the bread and butter of television. But then if you look at platforms like Shutter, who make their money off two things. One, they know how to market to specific audiences, so they're making movies that Hollywood just won't make anymore. These very similar lowbrow horror movies that are kind of in vain to the 1980s and 1970s, just with like modern filmmaking techniques, or they're putting out anthology stuff or just some found footage stuff that, like I said, these films have to kind of earn their place into cinemas these days, like Skinamarink. They had to get a cult following before it got put into theaters. Terrifier, same thing. It had to get a cult following before it got put into theaters. But I'm saying anthology could have a place. You just got to prove it. You have to prove itself. The Creepshow TV show is a prime example. It came out, it proved itself. It's gotten 4 seasons. Creeped Out lasted 2 seasons on Netflix and didn't go any further. But hey, that at least got a second season. So, I mean, it's. I think it depends on the right place and the right time. If the market wants it, I think the Goosebumps, for example, I think really wants it. The fans really want it. So I think it could work if they gave it to it. But they're thinking longevity. They're thinking like, all right, where are we going to be with this show 3 or 4 years down the line? Is the hype still going to be here? So.
And I know, like, when they announced season 2 of the Goosebumps show, it says they're going in a more anthology route. Don't know what that means. I don't know if they're meaning anthology, like, per season there's a new story, or if
it's per season new story, like American Horror Story. They're going that route.
Even though I do also feel like they could do somewhat of a mini anthology in the episodes, because the whole plot synopsis of this is like looking into like the disappearances of 5 kids. So what if they go kind of the anthology route and each kid's disappearance is linked to a Goosebumps story?
That would be interesting, and like I think that idea sounds way better than a lot of the ideas that seem to be floating out there already. But like I think the disconnect, right, for like Haunted Mansion or Goosebumps, for example, is that Disney, all they need to do is just listen to fans. And if fans speak loud enough and they all kind of want the same thing, we can end up getting these type of shows. A Haunted Mansion anthology show, I think, would be absolutely great. I wouldn't mind it animated either. I think that would be kind of fun too.
I think there was actually I remember reading somewhere that there was an animated series for Haunted Mansion in the works that ended up getting scrapped.
I don't know why. I mean, maybe because they had other things they wanted to spend money on. Was it around COVID?
I don't remember when it was, but it might have been around COVID.
I think I remember it, and I think it was one of those things that they had to axe because they didn't know about COVID. And then a few years later, you had the SAG-AFTRA strikes and all that. So, and some ideas have been permanently deflated because of that strike, and some have taken a while to get going back on course. So we'll see what that happens.
And also, I think another reason that the Haunted Mansion movie hurts so bad is because the SAG-AFTRA strikes kind of hurt the marketing for it. Like, it wasn't very well marketed in a lot of ways. And I feel like that's because once the strikes came out, they couldn't do anything with the actors or the writers or anything like that. They had some stuff at the beginning where the actors did some things, but then once the strikes hit, that all went away. Like, I remember seeing a really fun behind-the-scenes feature, not behind the scenes, but a featurette they did where Owen Wilson, Lakeith Stanfield, and Jamie Lee Curtis actually worked on the Haunted Mansion ride in Disneyland for a day and like surprised the fans and stuff, which is like,
oh, that is so cool. I wish I was there that day. I would have lost my mind.
I mean, it was the one in California, but
still,
yeah, it was just really cool. Like, it's just cool. Like, I love it when you see shows and movies where you can tell the cast is having a good time and they truly are passionate about what they're making. And it's not just like for some of these movies where the cast are just there for the money. Like, there's so many things nowadays. Like, I mean, say what you will about this show, because there's a lot of discourse on people who either hate this show or love this show. I'm more in the case of love this show, but Has Been Hotel on Amazon Prime, that's like a prime example of like, the cast has so much fun. You can just tell from the interviews I've watched with them. Like, they genuinely love what they're doing with this show. And they've been interacting with fans on social media and doing all this other stuff. And like, that's what I love to see in these kind of shows and movies, is when the cast actually gives a crap about what they're making and don't just see it as a cash grab.
Yeah, and like, I wish that if we ever get like a hypothetical Tower of Terror movie, that whoever makes the movie might have some sort of actual love for that ride, and they're gonna like try to push hard to have Rod Serling's legacy attached to it. Maybe try to push hard to have that actual story featured in the ride put into the movie and fleshed out. not necessarily like that, straight to ABC movie back in the day, because I think that was actually pretty serviceable to the ride, but maybe go a whole different direction with it,
Yeah.
and but make it feel like that vibe that this film was able to do, and make it more like a love letter to the ride and to the fans of the ride, instead of trying to make something from scratch. Because I think the formula of yesteryear, it worked for Pirates, but I just don't think that you can get that kind of traction these days. I just think that it's going to disconnect the audience, right? You're better off making these one and done movies and just be
Right.
done with it.
Or like I even seen a really cool idea if they wanted to keep doing movies based on like the Haunted Mansion story, kind of the ride universe. They could do one based on Phantom Manor, which is the Disneyland Paris version of the mansion, which has a very different story, and it's a much more dramatic take about. It's kind of a Phantom of the Opera kind of inspired story about. It's like set in an old Western town because that version is set in Frontierland. So the story of that mansion ties into Big Thunder, and there's this idea of like this young woman named Melanie who was engaged, or like who's the daughter of like a wealthy prospector who basically was working in a mining company who mined in Big Thunder. And the natives warned them about this thing called the Thunderbird, that if they dug too deep into the mine, it would awaken this Thunderbird and cause this massive earthquake. And the dad doesn't listen, and he ends up using his wealth to build this opulent manor right by Big Thunder as a way to kind of raise his daughter in a very sheltered home. He was very overprotective, pretty much, and it's kind of implied that every single suitor, because she had like in this new updated story, she had like 4 suitors, and all of them died in some mysterious manner. And it's kind of implied that her dad was the one who took them out because no man was good enough for his daughter. And
That's surprisingly dark.
and like in the original story, I think they kind of added it out now because of modern sensitivities to this kind of stuff. But before they revamped the story in the original version, his daughter was engaged to a train engineer who the father disapproved of. And on the wedding night, this mysterious phantom appeared in the mansion and lured the groom into the rafters of the attic and hung him.
Oh my lord, that is dark.
And in the actual ride, like, where you, in the stretching room of the Haunted Mansion, where you see the hanging corpse, in Phantom Manor in the original version, you see the Phantom holding the noose of this, like, freshly hung corpse. Like,
That is insane.
And, like, basically, and the whole story after that revolves around Melanie, this daughter, never taking off her wedding dress and just wandering forlorn around the manor for the rest of her life, slowly aging and eventually dying, waiting for her groom to come back, thinking he's going to show up eventually, and this phantom tormenting her constantly and haunting her around the mansion until she eventually just kind of gives up her soul to save everybody who's riding through it. And that storyline is super dark, and that would be so cool to see in a movie. And the ride itself also has a lot of darker imagery. Like with the Haunted Mansion, when you're descending backwards into the graveyard, in Phantom Manor, you are descending into an open grave and passing by rotting corpses, reanimating and like reaching out to your car and stuff. And it's pretty intense and like really cool to see. And there's like this whole underground ghost town you end up going through instead of the usual graveyard. And there's just a lot of really fun and cool ideas that ride takes in such a unique direction that it'd be really interesting to see a movie based on that.
Oh yeah, I would love to see it. That story sounds really cool. I think it's really dope, actually. I think that'd be kind of edgy for Disney to put out, and I'm all for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I know nowadays, like some of the modern enhancements, they're taking out a lot of the noose imagery from that ride because that's a big modern sensitivity nowadays, which is fair enough. It's an understandable reason to be sensitive, but like, I don't know, it just kind of takes away from that edge the ride had.
Yeah, but maybe they can incorporate it as like a nod in a hypothetical film without making like a focal point of the plot.
Right.
They can imply it that it happened, but not go into too much depth about it.
I mean, like you can tell how different the times are today versus back then. Because even in like the 2003 Eddie Murphy movie, in the intro, you literally see Master Gracie hanging in the rafters. Like you literally see that shot for a brief second in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they weren't. back then, like kids horror was a different animal. They were actually willing to like put some kids in harrowing stuff. These days, they're going for more like comedic movies, and
Yeah.
the villains aren't even threats. You know what I mean?
Yeah, or even like shows like The Haunting Hour, like that show wasn't afraid to kill some of the kid
Oh
characters.
yeah,
Like
Dreamcatcher, for example.
or like Girl in the Painting, like or some of those episodes. Like that's what I love to see. Like I mean, it may make me sound like a psychopath, but let's kill some kids in these shows and movies. Let's make things like dark and edgy because that's what is actually interesting and cool to see when you take these kind of boundaries.
And it's weird because back when I was growing up, these movies like Don't Look Under the Bed, which is actually more innocent than a lot of stuff, was so scary that it was pulled on Disney Channel because parents complained. These days, I think kids are more desensitized. They grow up on like smartphones. They grow up playing, mature games like Grand Theft Auto. They they know how some of this stuff works. A lot of them grew up watching violent films at a young age. I don't know, maybe because, as generation as these former generations started to become parents, they're like, hey, we thought these movies are cool. I think our kids are okay watching them. They become desensitized at such a young age at some of this stuff. I just don't see why they're going sillier in the in
Yeah,
the in the family genre. I'm like, shouldn't you be going even harder? Like, or doubling down on some stuff? It just makes no sense to me.
yeah.
Um,
And that's kind of why I really like the this Haunted Mansion movies because like with Travis's character, like they go like in depth, like he almost like is considering dying because he misses his dad so much and just wants to see him and hates everything else without him. And just the way that the Hatbox Ghost uses that and lures him into this trap to give up his soul and essentially die under the guise of getting to see his dad again is so dark and so like messed up, but I love it for that.
yeah, I mean, that's part of the thing I could praise about this movie. It does have those moments of darkness in it, and it has that more, I wouldn't say outright scary elements to them, but it does have those implications and actual threatening moments. There's legit tension. There's actual stakes going on with this plot. And as long as it has those things, usually in kids horror, I'm good to go. Like I'm like, okay, this is more innocent horror to begin with, but as long as you can like take some of this stuff a little bit seriously, it makes the novelty of these being kids, and obviously the writers aren't going to normally go out of their way to do something terrible to these kids.
Yeah.
But if you give them something harrowing to go through, that's more of the experience that brings us back to the subgenre. And I think that this movie delivered, and that's why I would definitely revisit it again, for sure.
Yeah, and like as well as like the interesting thing is like well I will say in some ways the scares in this movie feel a little more safe than the 2003 one because like looking back at the 2003 movie like the mausoleum scene in that movie is awesome. Like the scene with all the zombies like chasing Eddie Murphy's character and his daughter out of this mausoleum, like that scene is legitimately intense and scary. And the zombie makeup looks phenomenal. I mean, that was done by Rick Baker. Like that stuff is all real. That was a really great scene, and that is probably the best scene in the movie.
Yeah, yeah, it is a little bit toned down, but I think that's more of a common element in
Yeah.
kids' horror these days. Is that the villains as a whole feel like they're really toned down from the former, and I
Hmm.
just don't get why.
Yeah.
But
Even I think the Hatbox Ghost is definitely a very intense and intimidating villain, which I like.
yeah, I do feel like movie also. I guess here's another nitpick thing. It could have leaned a little more into setting up the scares
Hmm.
and setting up scenes that are actually kind of frightening and deal with more of the exploration of the home and involving the scares. Because if you can play up some of these ghosts like they're legitimately frightening, and just give the audience just a glimpse of nightmare fuel, just a glimpse, and sprinkle it out pretty rapidly. This could have been a very even more intense movie than it could have been. It could have been a little more darker and
Hmm.
lean into that.
Yeah, and it could have still kept this movie's PG-13, so it could have still kept that PG-13 and leaned darker. Like, because I remember like even in like some of the teaser trailers and stuff, they have some scenes that were drastically changed in the movie, like the scene where Ben encounters the Hatchet Man ghost, where he's like walking down the hallway and he keeps passing by the portrait, and the portrait like changes as he's passing by it. In the trailers, the portrait looked a lot creepier and more realistic, and B, it was like he passed by it once, it was just like normal with his hands on the table. Passes by it a second time, it's still normal, and then he passes by it a third time, and it's holding up the hatchet. But in the movie, they do it where he passes by it once and it's normal, passes by it a second time, and he's already holding the hatchet, and the ghost just like walks out of the frame. And I just feel like that was just a little less anticlimactic because they only did it once instead of, again, if you watch the trailer, they do it like 3 times where he passes by before something actually happens, and you don't actually see the payoff. And I feel like that scene was just kind of anticlimactic because they didn't draw it out more, as well as the actual where he encounters the hatchet ghost, which I think is really well done, where he's like flashing the camera and you see like it highlighted by the like spectral photography light every once in a while. But it's like a 2-second scene and then it's over. And I feel like they could have definitely done more with that sequence in particular.
Yeah, and the problem I see with PG-13 horror these days, is specifically in the family or kids horror subgenre, is that these movies will get a PG-13, but in all actuality, it could have just been PG. And and for the reasons why they get PG-13 is for like the smallest things. In this movie's case, I do feel like maybe some studio meddling kind of potentially got in the way of the director's vision. Because I think he honestly wanted to make a legitimately scary and atmospheric film that he believed the ride was. But I do feel like Disney probably stepped in and be like, hey, you can't go too far. You know, we are a brand. This is a family-friendly ride. We're trying to like scare the crap out of kids. But I do feel like there was some elements there that you mentioned that were in the trailer or maybe acts out of the movie. I haven't seen any of the deleted scenes or anything. But I do feel like maybe he did suffer from some studio meddling going on, and that's a common phenomenon. And it's the unfortunate side effect of Hollywood. Sometimes, you know, you have a creator with a good head, good creative mind, and he can't do exactly everything he wants to do because the studio tells him no.
Yeah, and in some ways that's why I like in some ways, if like the budget is good, obviously, like so that's why I like streaming movies, is because they don't have that studio meddling a lot of the time. They can go farther with their concepts and things like that, like movies and shows and stuff that go to streaming. They take things a lot farther than most theatrical things do.
Yeah, theatrical, they're looking for general audience, as in streaming, they've already done the legwork. They've done the ad placement. They've done the spying on you through your smartphone. They already know what you like. They've already targeted you. They got you as the audience already, and they're going to probably click on their movie and watch it. So it's a whole different ball game with streaming. They can make what they want to a specific audience, but it can reach a whole lot more people than it would going for a general audience in a theater. It's weird.
Yeah, and like with streaming as well, is because there's that wide variety of different genres and things you can access. You know, streaming just automatically appeals to general audiences because of just the variety of things they have in there. They have a mix of like kids movies, kids shows, and then stuff for adults. So it's just like a good mix where everyone can just watch what they enjoy.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we said a lot about this movie. I know I said I gave it about a B plus. Would you give this movie like an A on your scale of like you love it, or?
Yeah, I would say it's probably like a solid 8.5 to 9 out of 10.
9 out of 10.
Because,
That's
like,
where that's probably where I give it, like maybe like a 8.5, somewhere in that
because,
range.
like, despite its flaws, as a fan of the ride, I got pretty much everything I could have wanted out of this movie. So that's why it left me with a big smile when I first saw it in theaters. So
Yeah, I left with a lot of good emotions. I would say when I saw it, I was like, yeah, this is the movie that I've been closer to wanting all these years, and I felt that they brought something I was not expecting to love it as much as I did. If I'm being honest, I went into it kind of lukewarm, not with high expectations, but hoping that my expectations would be like hopefully met, and they were. I would say I came out impressed, given it all. And don't blame me for that. It's just because I've been so burnt out on kids horror, like I said, in the past 10 years, that I had mild faith with this. But it proved itself to me, and I was like, okay, I'm a fan now.
yeah, I mean, I feel like we covered all our stuff. So
yeah, I had fun. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. It's always fun to talk to you and get to do this stuff. And
Yeah,
actually,
man.
I'll bring this up to you after we're done recording, but I have a couple other ideas we can maybe do.
All right, all right, nice. I can't wait. I can't wait to keep this collab train moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, everyone, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this review. Hopefully, for you people who were iffy on this movie or judging it based on word of mouth on the internet, hopefully our opinions changed your mind and you'll be willing to give this movie a chance. It's on Disney Plus, so if you have Disney Plus, you can just watch it there. You don't have to necessarily buy a physical copy of it. Um, yeah, just give it a chance. We both agreed that it's really good, and I think that if you give it a chance and go into an open mind, I feel like you would overall enjoy it.
Yeah, I agree. A whole 100%.
Yeah, again, thank you for coming on, Completionist. It's always fun talking to you. And again, we just thank you guys all for watching. Make sure if you want to see more of my content, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And yeah, hope to see you all in the next video. See ya.
See y'all.